Welcome back. Okay, hopefully just soon we'll get some slides up here. So maybe while people are gathering in, we've covered, over 1,000 years of history. Do you have questions, things that didn't make sense, things that need kind of extra explanation? Or maybe observations you'd like to make that might help clarify things? It's coming? Excellent. Okay, well, if you don't, let's get started with the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. First, I need to tell you what a hadith is. So, we talked about the Quran yesterday. The Quran is the, excuse me, Quran is the authoritative scriptures of Islam. And these are the actual sayings of Muhammad as he's in a trance, is how they talk about it. Now, the hadith are sayings of the prophet. So these are outside of the Quran. They're considered very authoritative, but not the word of God like the Quran is. So the Quran is considered sacred, whereas the hadith are really good ideas. So basically what would happen is as Muhammad would be going about his daily work and life, he would say something and somebody would remember it and they would include it in their kind of recitation. When they talk about the Quran, they might say, and the prophet said this. So it's kind of a separate body of literature from the Quran. It's not held at the same level that the Quran is, but it's considered really important because the prophet himself said this, and he's kind of the ideal Muslim ruler. Thank you. So the hadith are usually referred to when you're looking for ways to live. It's kind of an ethical guideline. The hadith also get argued over a lot more because some people said, that hadith is actually just somebody made that up. And so they have this long a series of steps that you need to do, you need to say to be able to claim a hadith is authoritative. So hadith get abused, and even Muslims will say, the hadith, you have to be really careful. People will use them for the wrong reasons. However, there is one hadith that not too many people argue about. I don't think they do. Now they kind of argue about it in terms of eschatological arguments. But it goes like this. Purportedly, the prophet once said, "Verily you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will he be. And what a wonderful army will that army be." So you can see even in Muhammad's lifetime, Constantinople is the target. It is a thing they're expecting to conquer at some point. Remember last night we talked about the two empires that they were facing? It was the Sassanid Persian Empire on one side. It was the empire of Byzantium on the other. And they successfully took the Sassanid Persian Empire and half of the Byzantine Empire. But they never could quite take the city. Remember, we talked about the siege of Constantinople in 717, and they just weren't able to quite conquer it. But they sure thought they were going to because Muhammad had promised them they would. Well, now the Islamic world had waited more than 800 years to capture the great city. And always the Christians had managed somehow to defend the walls and deny the Muslims the final prize. In addition to that, this Fourth Crusade I just told you about had badly damaged the kind of the power of Byzantium. So they did get the city back eventually. The Latin Empire lasted only until 1261. So you'll note that 1261 is, right in here. So here is the fall of Constantinople. So there's a period of time in here of a little more than a century, well, actually almost 2 centuries, excuse me, where the Muslims really thought they should be able to take that city because it's been weakened by the Latin kingdom, the Latin Crusaders, but they still weren't able to. Oh, sorry, that was a mistake. So here we are, ready to talk about the Ottoman Empire. So we talked about the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks carve out this huge empire, but it doesn't last that terribly long. However, back here in Anatolia, so in this peninsula right here is called the Anatolian Peninsula, and it's always been the hinterland, kind of the important small farming community for Constantinople. Whatever city is here, whatever it's called, whether it's Istanbul as it is not nowadays, or back in ancient times when it was Constantinople, this Anatolian Peninsula is just geographically important to that area right there. So same thing is true during the Byzantine Empire. As the Seljuk Turks have carved out a huge chunk of this that they're now ruling, they really shave off a lot of the power, I should say, of the empire. It's where the small farmers are. It's where a lot of the wealth from taxes come. It's the breadbasket of the empire in many ways. And so it's just a really important hinterland, and it goes away with the Seljuk Turks conquest. Well, the Crusaders come through, of course, and they defeat the Seljuks, but they don't really push them very far back. So if you'll see this word here, Konya, Konya is the capital. This is a modern term. It used to be Iconium. You'll recognize Iconium from the book of Acts. Paul travels to Iconium. That's this city right here. This is kind of the capital of a new political entity that shows up after the Seljuk Turks kind of go away. And we call it the Sultanate of Rum. And Rum is the kind of the Turkish way of saying Rome. So they're basically saying this is the political entity of Rome. It's the Sultanate of Rome. And the reason they call it Rome is because they still thought of the Eastern Roman Empire as Roman. Everybody did. It's only modern historians that call it Byzantium. So this is the Eastern Roman Empire. They think they have carved off an important section of it. They're ruling the Sultanate of Rome. So this sultanate it's Turkish, so it's from the steppes. They speak a Turkic language. It's not Arabic, but they do practice Islam. So they do have Arabic in their religious traditions. And on the edges of the empire, of the sultanate. So this sultanate kind of, you can't see it on here, but it controls basically the center section. And on the edges, there are different warlords that grow up. And they're kind of independent from the Sultanate of Rum, and they're also independent of Byzantine control. Byzantium wishes to control them and to get them out, but they can't. But there's a little bit of back and forth between these Turkish emirs. We call them the marcher lords because they're on the frontiers, or in the Turkish, they'd be called begs or beys. These guys basically have a small warband, and they live by raiding either side, either the Sultanate or Byzantium. Now, they tend to raid the Christian areas more than the Muslim areas because they're not supposed to fight against Muslims, but they're a little bit of an unknown in the political calculus of the area. And one particular guy, his name was Osman. He forms a following in 1299, so just before the 1300s get started. He forms this warband. They live like nomads, just like all of these Turkish groups are. They tend to not settle in the cities. They settle outside of the cities and tax the cities. But remember, these are nomadic horse breeders, and so they like room to roam. And they live in the saddle. And he's raiding Byzantine area. So he's a marcher lord from this kind of area right up in here. So you see this dark, I don't know what color it is. Oh, by the way, let's talk about colors just a little bit. I got chewed out by my 10-year-old last night because I called something pink that was clearly purple. So I don't know what color this is. This dark color here represents the earliest conquest of Osman and his followers. And it's kind of their home base. So you can see it's very close to Constantinople. It's just across the Bosporus, basically, and a little bit inland. And in his lifetime, Osman basically is a war chieftain all his life. But he leaves a legacy of conquest behind. And Osman's followers then start to follow his son. And they start calling themselves, in the Ottoman Turkish, Osmanlı, which means with Osman, or the Osmanli, the guys who are Osmans, basically. Eventually, it gets corrupted to what we would call Ottoman in modern, and even Turks would too. In modern parlance, it's the Ottoman Turks. So this is the beginning of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, which is going to be a very big deal, and we need to deal with it in this session. So from 1299, each sultan kind of conquered a little bit more. So here's you can follow the color coding. You can see the empire grow. So first it's this little bit here, and then pretty soon it's more. And then in 1359 to 1451, which is a pretty long period, and there's a lot of important things that are going on in there, you can see they capture most of the Anatolian Peninsula, at least the western half, and a huge chunk of the Balkans. Now, this is European territory. This is the other hinterland of the Byzantine Empire. So this is all happening while the empire is still alive here in Constantinople. Well, it's now called Istanbul on here. So in Constantinople, its empire shrinks to just the city and a few places along the Black Sea coast. Up here, you can't see it on here, but there is a city by the name of Trabzon, they have another fortress city over there. So Constantinople, the great Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, has shrunk by the 1400s into just a tiny, tiny section of territory, mainly the walled city of Constantinople and a little bit of hinterland around it. So, as this ring of Ottoman Turks, Muslim Ottoman Turks, is closing in on them, the Ottomans they're conquering, but they're also forming relationships with other groups. And there are other groups that are, interested in forming relationships with the Ottoman Turks. Most of them are over here. Very few of them are over here. Over here, this is Christian territory, and they tend to be pretty hostile. So the Ottoman Turks are forming relationships with the different Turkish sultans of the Sultanate of Rum. They're also forming relationships with other Muslim entities over here in the east. So they tend to focus most of their conquests on the Byzantine Empire. So if you want to think of the Ottomans as kind of a growth that grows into and takes over the Byzantine Empire, you're not far off. There are some civil wars along the way. As in I think it was, let me see if in the early 1400s, so 1402, as it looked like the Ottoman Empire was about to capture the city. So this is 50 years before it actually does. The city gets a reprieve. What happens is this Mongol warlord by the name of Tamerlane, or Timur the Lame, comes in from the steppes, from the east. He attacks the Turkish Ottoman Empire. It's not an empire yet, but the Turkish Ottomans, and he captures their sultan, Bayezid. And he's hauled off. I think he might be executed, I don't remember. But after he dies, there's this great big long civil war between Bayezid's sons to figure out who is going to actually rule the empire. But finally, they kind of fight through that, and a new sultan comes on. And the guy's name is Mehmet II. So Mehmet II is a powerful sultan. He's really young. He's energetic. He is very sure that he is going to take the city of Constantinople. That's his goal. So he's got a big hinterland. He's got this area all around here. He's got Constantinople surrounded. But remember, there's kind of a legend, not a legend, there's sort of body of myth that has grown up around Constantinople. It always defeats its enemies. It always survives the sieges. I mean, sure, there was the Latin Empire that was there for a little bit, but Constantinople never falls. Over the centuries, it has seen countless Bulgars and Avars and Varangians and Muslims of various sorts, whether they be Arabs or Turks. It always withstands them. It can't fall. It's a Christian city. It's the Christian outpost in the east. It's the gates of Europe. It's going to keep the barbarians at bay. That's kind of the myth surrounding Constantinople. Well, all of that changes in the 1450s. So, Mehmet II. Um, before I go there, I should. Let's. Don't want to start the story of the conquest of Constantinople without first letting you know what's going on over here, because this map looks different over here on the west. So you remember that the Muslim area used to extend all the way up to here. Remember, the Battle of Tours was up here. Charles Martel stopped the invasion of Europe and pushed the Muslims back in the Christian mythology. So the Muslims have been establishing a kingdom here for a long time. It's the kingdom of, well, there are a bunch of different kingdoms, including Kingdom of Cordoba, Granada. It was called Al-Andalus. This has been subjected to a vigorous Christian attack, basically. These little kingdoms that had been up here in the north, they've grown, and they keep taking more and more territory, and they're taking territory mostly from the Muslim emirs of Cordoba or of other states in Al-Andalus. And eventually the kingdoms get to the point where in 14... By the time, just before the conquest of Constantinople, the Muslim control is basically just this really small emirate of Granada right down here at the base. Now, the same year that Columbus sails for the New World, 1493, which is after the fall of Constantinople, but in that same year, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula is conquered by Ferdinand and Isabella. So within, 40 years of this time, this entire peninsula is going to once more be back in Christian hands. So what's been happening in Europe is, as the Ottoman Empire grows into this kind of the southeastern side of Europe, on the other end, in the western side, the Muslim control has been being pushed back by the Spanish Reconquista, is what it's called. All right, so that's been going on over here in the west, but over here, Constantinople is very much surrounded. Now, when Muhammad... I keep calling him Muhammad, I'm sorry. Mehmet. When Mehmet becomes Sultan, he decides it's time to get rid of this city. So he had been Sultan earlier with his dad, and then, it's a long, complicated story, but he becomes Sultan again for the second time at age 21 in 1451. And this is when he really comes into his own and says, okay, I'm going to be now a warrior Sultan. I'm going to really go for it. And of course, the big prize here is capture this Christian city that Muhammad had talked about way back in the beginning of Islam, that they're going to sometimes capture it. If you get that, it'd be the perfect kind of climax to a vigorous reign. So the Italian city-states of northern Italy here, Venice is one, Milan is one, another one would be Florence, Genoa. Those are all important city-states. They've been getting scholars from the Byzantine Empire. As this noose closes around them, scholars have been leaving and going up to here. And this is part of the story of what we call the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance. It's in part because these scholars bring their Greek-speaking skills and their manuscripts, kind of remembering the old knowledge of the ancient Greeks and Romans and teaching it to these wealthy, powerful northern Italian city-states. He's just bringing in a lot. This process is bringing a lot of vigor and other kinds of energy to the arts and to the architecture. So that's all going on as Mehmet. Not sure where Mustafa came from. Sorry. As Mehmet is closing the curtain around, or drawing the noose tight around Constantinople. So in 1453, the Ottoman military is gearing up for the final assault. It's massing its troops. And in addition to massing its troops, it's starting to invest heavily in a new kind of technology, cannon. And this is the first time that Constantinople's walls are going to face cannon. Remember, those walls have stood for a long time, centuries. I mean, this is an old, ancient, fortified city. But for the first time, Ottoman troops are going to be dragging cannon into place and aiming cannon at those walls. And what's going to happen? Well, Constantinople was, like I said, it was really relying on these land walls here. It really needs these to hold up so that it can defend these other walls. From these other walls are easier to defend. So if you can defend the hard walls here, these land walls, then you have a good chance of holding up. So as the Turks mass outside of here, they aim these big cannons, and some of them are very big. There's one, I think Orban of Hungary was hired by the Ottomans because the last emperor of the Byzantines could not afford to hire him, and so the Ottomans could. He built this gigantic cannon that took, I don't remember. I may have it in my notes here. It took a very long time to build and a lot of people to move. I don't have it here in front of me, but the ball was just huge. That it was shooting a stone ball. They bring all these cannons in and they start blasting the walls. Now they can't shoot these things very often because they get too hot. But these ancient walls are built for catapults, not cannons. And they're relatively thin. They can't withstand these massive modern artillery hits. And they start going down. Now, these walls are in depth, so you have several rings of them, but the walls are definitely getting hit pretty hard. The Turks have way more men than what the city itself does. So the city itself has something, it's a little hard to pin down the numbers, but something less than 10,000 warriors in it. And even that has been supplemented some by Venice and other places. The Turkish army out here, and there's a Turkish army here, there's a Turkish army over here, and we'll talk about the Navy in just a little bit. The Turkish army is probably somewhere between 50 and 80,000. So way more Turks and allied troops than there are in the city. So Constantine the 11th is the emperor at this time, and he vows he's going to defend the city with all costs, at all costs. He's going to die in his city. So they string their chain up here. Now over here they have another kind of walled, fortified fort, essentially, to defend this end of the chain. So they still have their protected harbor where they've got all their ships in there. They still have Greek fire. But the Ottomans are tricky, and the Ottomans are siege warfare experts. They've taken a lot of cities by siege. So they try to bring their ships in here, and they have some scuffles with the Byzantine navy, and it's not working out well for them. They can't break through. So Mehmet, I still got it wrong. Mehmet the Conqueror is his name, Mehmet II. He brings his ships from this direction. He puts them on rollers, and he rolls them overland and launches them into the Golden Horn. And suddenly you've got Ottoman Navy ships inside the protected anchorage. There's massive battles with the fleet, and the Byzantines can see that the end is very, very near. So that the cannon out here are pounding away at the walls. And at the same time that they're pounding away at the walls, Turkish miners, mostly from Christian Balkan areas, the Balkans were a great mining territory. The Turks bring in miners from there to dig holes, tunnels under the ground, and they're going to try to get in underneath the fortifications and blow it up so it falls down so they can get in. Well, the Byzantines, on the other hand, have their own mining experts, and as the Turks are digging their tunnels, the Byzantines are digging counter tunnels. And occasionally, they'll find an Ottoman tunnel, they'll break through, and there'll be this terrible hand-to-hand fighting in dark spaces deep underground. And every time, the Ottomans are driven out by some way or another. Sometimes they just blow up the mine and it sinks before it gets to the walls. But there's a really interesting underground battle going on at the same time that all this other stuff is going on. So the Ottomans clearly have the upper hand. They have way more people. They have the city surrounded, and they're really good at what they do. But they're having a tough time breaking into this. This is, after all, Constantinople. It's the great fortress city of Christian Eastern Europe. By May 28th, it was clear that the end was getting close. They couldn't last much longer. Now, the Ottoman military had a special corps called the Janissaries. And what these guys were people who had been taken in the devshirme. The devshirme was a tax on boys. So the Ottomans would come into a Christian area, and they would say, you have to give us X number of boys between the ages of 6 and 10, and everybody had to give their, a boy up or so. So this is a boy tax. And these guys were taken at a very young age. They'd taken to the Islamic schools and taught Islam and forcibly converted to Islam, and they grew up fervent Muslims. Now, they were considered the Sultan's personal slaves. So they belonged to the Sultan. And these guys usually grew up to be very, very good soldiers and deeply loyal to the Sultan. And toward the end of the Ottoman period, some Christians would voluntarily send their children because the Janissaries became very powerful. The Janissaries were this corps that was recruited, or that was made from these taxed boys. So they became a very powerful, politically powerful, militarily powerful organization. And toward the end of the period, some Christians would actually send their sons on purpose so they become powerful, important people in the Islamic Turkic state. But at this point, it was mostly more forcible conversions. However, these Janissaries, by the time they became warriors, were usually deeply committed to the Ottoman cause, and they were very, very loyal. They were the shock troops. Now, they were no longer the horse-born steppe warriors of old, of the Turkish past. These were now they were often carrying early forms of the arquebus, so kind of the hand cannons, if you wish, or giant bows. They also had bows, and they were famous bowmen, and they had spears as well. These were the shock troops of the Ottoman infantry. When you called in the Janissaries, it was going to be a nasty fight because these guys did not give up easily, and they were professional soldiers. So the stage is set. The end is drawing near. Everybody knows it's going to end badly. But Constantine the 11th is determined to make a good end, as he puts it. So on May 28th, Constantine attends Vespers in the Hagia Sophia. Remember the Hagia Sophia, or the Hagia Sophia is how you can also say it. The Hagia Sophia that Justinian way back in the 500s built. Well, now here we are almost 1,000 years later. It's still standing, and I've been in it too, and it's quite impressive. It's a huge stone building, and in this great center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, for the last time, and he knows it's probably going to be the last time, Constantine the 11th goes to attend Vespers. And there are representatives from both the Catholic and the Orthodox church hierarchy there as well. So this is kind of this ecumenical moment where it's kind of bringing everybody together. They know it's a scary time, but maybe God will save the city again, like he has so often. In the middle of the night, at midnight, the Turks launch a general assault. So all along the land walls, there are ladders being thrown up, men climbing, their fierce combat all along this wall. Remember, some of these walls have been badly damaged and breached by the cannon. But eventually, a small group of Turkomans, and these would be wild Turks, and they kind of use the same term for it. The Eastern Ottoman Turks kind of thought as their Turkic step cousins is a little bit barbaric. A section of them break through the walls, but they can't quite get into the city. And so, of course, the Janissaries are called for. They find this breach, they charge in, there's a nasty fight around that breach, but eventually they exploit the breach, they get into the city, and at that point, it's all over. People are pouring in all over the walls, resistance is collapsing. Constantine the 11th, according to some sources, sees that the end is near. He takes off his purple robe, and he goes charging into fray to die an unknown soldier, and they never find his corpse. That's one story. I think it's unlikely. More likely he tries to get away and is caught in the confusion. But historians disagree somewhat on that. So Constantine the 11th dies. He's the last Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire is no more, and the Turks have captured the great city. So, Mehmet the Conqueror, as he is now called, because he has taken the great city of Constantinople, immediately moves his capital to the city. Now, the city is in pretty bad shape. It's been depopulated over decades because of the surrounding Turkish depredations. And Mehmed is interested in getting this to be a happening place again. So he repairs the walls, he builds a new palace, he builds hospitals, he builds barracks for his janissaries. He converts the Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Now that great city at the center of Eastern Orthodoxy is a mosque. Think what that does to their convictions that God was going to defend their city. That's really painful. And the shock waves are huge that go through Europe. Mehmed goes on to conquer other areas as well. So if you, let's see here. If you look at this map, so this green, I wasn't going to use colors. Okay, so it doesn't actually show his conquest. I think this other map would have showed better. So here you can see, not only does he conquer this, this is this dark blue, not only does he conquer Constantinople, but he also conquers pretty huge sections of the rest of the European Balkans, in addition to some stuff here in the east. So he is quite a conquering sultan. This gives you a little bit of a sense going on from the conquest of Constantinople. You probably can't see them terribly well, but there are some dates in here as they move relentlessly and ever farther into Europe. He does invade Italy, but that was unsuccessful. He gets kicked out. So Rome itself is getting very, very concerned because these Ottomans, they look like they're set to kind of take over the continent. And they're Muslims. They're the enemy of Christianity. What are we going to do? That's kind of the sense you get from Christian writings during this period. So the Muslim Turks are going to continue to threaten Europe for a long time to come. So if you look over here, you'll see Vienna right here. So Vienna it's a capital of the Habsburg Empire. I don't have time to tell you about the Habsburg Empire, but they're deeply Catholic. And if you want to find a city that encapsulates kind of Catholic, excuse me, it kind of encapsulates Catholic high culture, if you wish, you're going to have to go pretty far to find anything better than Vienna. Vienna is really the beating heart of Catholic Northern Europe. And even though it's on the south side, it's kind of the Germanic areas. And as you can see, it's quite close to Ottoman-controlled territory. And two different times, the Ottomans are going to place Vienna under siege. So well into the 1600s, I think it's in 1683, the last time the Ottomans besieged Vienna. So this is a long, centuries-long process. Now, it's easy to call the Turks enemies, right? Especially from a European perspective. From a Christian perspective, they thought of them as enemies too. We have a really interesting combination of worldviews in the story of Michael Sattler. So I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit because he's going to address the Turkish question. And he's going to address it from an early Anabaptist perspective. But I do need to kind of set it up. So the Protestant Reformation takes place, in which kind of the Northern Europe tries to basically get away from the rule of the Pope. And in that Reformation, a kind of radical branch breaks off called the Anabaptists. And you guys have had Anabaptist history recently. You know about that. So there is a... there's this trial of Michael Sattler. He's an early Anabaptist. He's been preaching and teaching in an area of southern Germany. I don't think it's on here, but it'd be somewhere in this area right over in here. And he's captured by the Catholic authorities. Now, the Catholic authorities are deeply connected to places like Vienna, okay, and the Habsburg Empire, who is in a death struggle with the Ottoman Empire, and very much see the Turks as the deep enemies of Christianity. They're the Antichrist, kind of. So in 1429, the Turks are going to besiege Vienna, and it's going to be a really close run thing. They almost capture it, but they don't. But 2 years before that happens, so in the build up to it, is where this trial of Michael Sattler happens. Now, Michael Sattler's trial happened 1 year after a really terrible defeat by the King of Hungary, in which he is killed. So these Turks are scary. They are seen as the great enemy of Christianity. So Michael's actually defending himself quite well. There was this panel of Catholic judges. Everybody knew he was going to get hanged at the end, but he wasn't going to go without, saying the truth. This was a man who believed the truth was deeply important, and he felt like he should say the truth to people, whether they were going to hear it or not. And he did that to his judges. He talked to them, and he tried to convince them of his perspective. So this passage that I'm going to read to you comes from the Global Anabaptist Encyclopedia. So it's not quite a primary source. The authors pulled from several primary sources to compile this event, but this is an encyclopedic entry. And I think I'll just read the whole thing. This is we'll be closing just soon here after this. We're breaking into the argument. Concerning the last point, Sattler admitted that he had taught that if the Turk should come, no armed resistance should be made. For it is written, "Thou shalt not kill." We should not resist any of our persecutors with sword, but with prayer cling to God that he may resist and defend. Is this sounding really different from anything we've been talking about since the time of Constantine? Remember, Constantine the Great is when this synthesis, this church state begins. Now we're getting a really different perspective. Excuse me. Sattler even admitted, so he was being put on trial because he was saying, don't fight the Turks. And they're saying, that's terrible. You're not supposed to do that. And Sattler said, yeah, I taught that. Sattler even admitted having said that if war were right, he would rather march against supposed Christians who persecute, capture, and kill the God-fearing. Oh, he's saying, I'd rather fight with the Turks. The Turk, knowing nothing about the Christian faith, knows nothing about the Christian faith. He's a Turk, according to the flesh. But you want to be considered Christians. You boast of being Christ's and still persecute his pious witnesses. You are Turks, according to the Spirit. To this strong admonition to the conscience of the court, Sattler added in conclusion that it was their calling to punish the wicked and protect the good. He could bear witness that the Anabaptists had done nothing contrary to God and the gospel. Likewise, the closest examination would substantiate that he and his brethren had never opposed the government by any act or word, either in revolt or sedition or in any other way. So he's saying, we're good citizens. I'd rather fight with the Turks than with you guys, but we follow what you ask us to do. If I thought it was right to fight, it would be better to be on their side than yours, but it's not. He demanded that experts be called and the Bible used in the original languages. A debate should be arranged. The Anabaptists were ready to be taught from the Bible. If they were proved to be in error, they would gladly bear the punishment. But if we are not shown to be in error, I hope to God that you will accept teaching and be converted. The idea that the judges might be taught and converted by Sattler seemed so peculiar to them that they put their heads together and burst out laughing. And then, indeed, this was a show trial, so this was kind of the breaking point. When he said that thing about the Turks, that he thought they were more right than the sword-bearing Christians, that was sort of the end of it. It was like, oh my goodness, let's get rid of this guy. And so it was soon after that that he was martyred. I think it was burning, but I can't remember exactly. Now, Michael Sattler understood something about the kingdom of God that most of the people who have featured in our story so far did not understand. He realized that conquering a physical kingdom would have no effect on the kingdom of God. Way back in the 600s, Muhammad had predicted his religion would conquer Constantinople. He saw this as the final defeat of Christianity. But Michael understood the kingdom of God was something very different from the Byzantine Empire. He didn't get those confused. Jesus' kingdom does not need to be defended. Instead, it needs to be tended. But Christians have had a hard time learning this lesson. And tomorrow, in our next session, they will once more attempt to force change on the Muslim population of the Middle East. That's the end of my talk today. Do you have questions? I haven't heard any questions. Go ahead. Let's see here. Okay, I don't have a great, it would be from here straight north, kind of about, I don't know, 2 inches above the top of the map. I can go to another slideshow if you want me to and show it to you. Right. The Crusades throughout Germany. So the Crusades are past by this time. We're now in the crusading efforts have been largely defeated. So now even Constantinople is defeated by the Muslims. So what comes next is the Industrial Revolution and the growth of, what's that? No, we're in 1453. So Columbus is going to set sail in about 40 years. So well, of course, by the time, here we end with Michael Sattler. That's in the Protestant Reformation. We're in the 1500s. The New World is already discovered. So we've kind of moved past the Middle Ages. So we jumped through the Middle Ages rather quickly. Notice what happens over here. We've got, this would be kind of the start of the Middle Ages, is about in here. This takes place in the Middle Ages, and this is about the end of it. This is the capture of Constantinople. So the stories we've told from the Middle Ages are these last 3 sessions. So we have moved very rapidly and left a lot out there that we haven't talked about. Focused very much on just a few little spots, mostly off the map of Western Civ. A lot of Western Civ courses are going to focus more on the Western side of this. So probably this is kind of new, is my guess, for some of you. So the Reformation is considered usually to be slightly after the end of the Middle Ages. So the Reformation and the Renaissance both kind of bring an end to the Middle Ages. It's sort of the end. So the capstone. So Michael Sattler is really operating at the very end of the Middle Ages, the beginning of the early modern period. So, any other questions? Yes.
Two questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're getting to the end of my knowledge here. I don't remember. I think some people may have said it might have been a meteorite, but it's pre-Islamic, so it would have been. It was in Mecca before Islam, so it wasn't a literate society that it fell into. So any knowledge we have is going to come through oral sources. I really don't know. You might know better than I do about that. Yeah. Yeah, it's still there, but it's been converted to kind of a shrine to Allah. For them. Yeah. And you had another question?
Yes. And just a clarification maybe, but you used the term Christian, so
yeah,
you're probably using it more like nominal Christian. Right?
Yeah, that's a very helpful question. Do you want to talk more about it? No, okay, so I am using the word Christian in the sense of they call themselves followers of Christ. And when we talk about this period of time from Constantine to right about in here where you get the Protestant Reformation going on, the people who call themselves Christians all do kind of fit into the, either Eastern Orthodox or Catholic tradition. That's who the Christians are. Some notable exceptions. We could talk about Peter Waldo, and we could talk about some other groups like them, maybe the Hussites and the Lollards. But really, most of them broadly fit into the idea of Catholic or Orthodox Christianity. That's who the Christians are at this time. Now, it's unsettling for us because we like to say there is an unbroken tradition going back to the apostles of people who are following Christ. And I think that's true, but I think to find that, we're going to have to look inside those two traditions. And I think we often find some really insightful writings in the monastic traditions. So the monks and the nuns leave behind some really fascinating accounts of their relationship with God that I think we can say, yeah, there's very much Christians going on. And I'm sure that in the normal populace, even in maybe with the lack of knowledge of the Bible, there was still deep connections to Christ through the rituals that the church performed. But it's Christianity that looks pretty different from what we would practice. I mean,
basically, if you were born on that side, you were a Christian. If you were here,
so yes, it is a nominal Christianity in the sense that you are baptized as a baby, and that's what makes you a Christian. Or you are baptized, or not baptized, you are born into a Muslim family, and so you are a Muslim. And to this day, if you ask a Turk what they are, well, they'll say, I'm a Turk. That means I'm a Muslim. You're born, you're Muslim when you're born. Good.
The Ottoman Empire is so fascinating. So I've already told students that what would have happened, or I've wondered what would have happened if the Anabaptists would have gone over into the Ottoman Empire. Is it not true that there was religious freedom there? And you weren't allowed to serve in the army unless if you had been a Muslim, like you had to be a Muslim to be part of the army. So
I think so, yes.
Would have been a problem.
Right.
I've often wondered, like, what would have happened if the Anabaptists would have gone over? Then there might have been some sold into there as slaves.
So I think you're right. I think in this area right up in here, there were Anabaptists that moved into there, maybe more closer to the frontier regions. This would have been places like Bohemia, kind of, let's see, what the Hutterite. I'm getting my names mixed up. I think it is the Hutterites, right? The Anabaptists that practice communal living. Some of them moved into this area, and because of the depredations of both sides, of Catholics and Ottomans, they ended up just getting robbed of pretty much everything they were producing. And so they switched to more of a communal way of living as a way of caring for each other in this kind of no man's land between the two empires. So there were Ottomans in that area. I'm confident that some of them got swept up in some of the taxes or some of the slave raids and stuff like that. I don't know those stories. Do you know any of them?
Not for sure.
I would love to hear some of that, sir.
I've heard a story of some Anabaptist boys being sold in
the
Ottoman Empire as slaves and being connected with the church in Thessalonica.
Okay, so that's going to be over in here. Yeah.
That this was an old church, and it might have that the church had such historic roots that it might have been there since biblical times.
Fascinating.
I've heard that talk
Yeah.
about. I don't know for sure.
Yeah. So
but I've heard that
yeah.
story.
That is very possible. I can't give you more details. I am not an Anabaptist expert, okay? So my focus has generally been on general history. I enjoy the Anabaptist stories. I just don't know them as well as I do the more of the sweep of history. Thank you. Those are great questions. One of the things that you get with the in-depth stories of very of individuals like you were talking about is you get a kind of a clearer picture of a very small piece of what we're talking about here. So I'm not able to give you that this weekend because of time constraints. Instead, we're zooming out and giving you big sweeping events. Just know that in those events, there are all these fascinating little stories that really ought to be discovered. That's your job. You get to do that on your own. Find a good book and read it. Maybe if you find a really good podcast, you can use that. But generally speaking, books are better for you, in my opinion. Okay, other questions? Thank you for that. Oh, yes, Darrell.
Darrell, you mentioned that Christians were selling their slaves, their sons, sending their sons.
By the end of the Ottoman period, yes.
Into the Ottoman. So what was the purpose of that?
Because
still trade them, or they
no,
wanted them to get into?
they wanted them to have political power. Because their sons would become janissaries who would then be able to have a say in who the next sultan would be. And
So did they think they were going to change the?
no, this was simply to make their life better. So now, yeah, my son's a Muslim. He is over there in Constantinople, and he sends us money sometimes. That kind of thing happened. Or, he keeps us safe by getting the right governor put in place and that kind of thing. So it just gave some community or some families kind of a way in. However, I would like to stress that was only at the end, and it was a fairly small number of them. So this is generally seen as a very bad thing to lose your sons to the Ottomans. But it did happen, and it happened there were some prominent grand viziers who were who had come from the Janissaries, and that's why I spoke of it. It is something that did happen. Yes. Yeah, so the persecution of Christians was primarily the tax that I talked about. Otherwise, the Christians were allowed to pretty much live as they wanted to. They had their own, the Ottoman Empire had a millet system in which each religious group, whether whether it was Orthodox Christians or whether it was Islamic or Muslims or whether it was Jews, each of them, if they had any kind of legal problem, would appeal to their religious authority to resolve the issue. So there was that sort of religious freedom in the Ottoman Empire. It was reasonably tolerant, except for the tax. That feels like a pretty big thing, a boy tax. But otherwise, the Ottoman Empire emperors were reasonably easy to live under as Christians. So none of them ever became Christians, not even close. To be an Ottoman is to be a Muslim. So yeah, they did not become Christians. Although toward the end, and we're not going to talk about it much tomorrow, but toward the end of the empire, there was the Armenian genocide, which was a time when they were persecuting, you might say, or exterminating Christians, because they were worried that the Russians were going to attack them, and the Russians were Eastern Orthodox Christians, and they saw the Armenians as a likely third column in their country, and decided to just get them out of there, and it ended up being a really terrible experience. And the Kurds, who did most of the forced evacuations, ended up murdering many of them. It was over a million of them were killed. It was, right. Well, close to Russia for sure. I don't know how far they moved. Are you thinking of the Russian Mennonites? So I might be wrong here. I thought the Hutterites would have come from this area more, and the Russian Mennonites is a different story. Under Catherine the Great, they would have settled more in this area, close to the Don River and the Crimean Peninsula. Eventually, a lot of these Russian Mennonites in 1870s moved to Kansas, Nebraska, Manitoba, those areas. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Catherine the Great was a Tsarina of Russia who was of Prussian origin. And when she conquers this area from the Ottoman Turks, she decides she wants to tame the steppes. So she offers free land to the German farmers. A lot of Prussian farmers say, come take this free land. And they came down there in droves. A lot of them were Mennonites. And they set up big spreads there. And she offered it to them for free, and that they wouldn't have to serve in the military. And then in 1872, after the Crimean War, Tsar Paul said, we're not going to do this exemption from the military anymore. You've got to actually serve in the military. And that's when a bunch of them said, well, let's go find new land. And they went to the west primarily because the U.S. government had given these railroad companies incentives. If you build a railroad from this point to this point, we'll give you offsetting large land for free, and then you can sell it off. And so these railroad companies went over to Europe and kind of hawked it around. And eventually these Mennonites sent a committee and traveled around to various places to find the best land to buy. And some of them settled just north of where we live in a place called Heston and Newton. A bunch of them settled up in there, bought a bunch of land off the railroad company and stuff like that. There are Hutterites in Kansas. Wait, there are Holdemans in Kansas. I'm not sure if there are Hutterites there. I'm sure there are. I think Hutterites tended to live more in Canada, but you're getting right to the edge of my knowledge. I shouldn't speak too authoritatively here. So I don't know much more than what I said. I'm sorry. Who else? And some of you may know more about this. Do any of you want to speak into this question? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. I hope I'm getting the terms right. I think Holdeman is a term that comes from the New World side. I think the Hutterites are an older group, and I think they were connected with this kind of fringe area between the two. Yeah. I think Holdemans are in Kansas. I don't know if they are everywhere. Yeah, they're not as strong a colony, certainly. They do kind of clump, but I don't think it's quite the same. Everybody gives their possessions to the, yeah. That's true. But it's a little bit different kind of colony as well. I mean, they have individual holdings and stuff too. Yeah.
The difference might be communal versus colony.
Okay. Sure, that's helpful. Yeah. Any other questions? This is fun. I like this kind of thing. Okay, well, let's bring it to a close here. Why don't we pray, and then we'll come back tomorrow and kind of wrap this up. Tomorrow is going to be sort of when we get when you get the payoff for having slogged through all this history. You have a little bit more history to go through, and then hopefully our last session will be more of a wrap-up that will help bring it together a little bit. Let's pray. Father, thank you for just helping us to put the pieces together. We know that these stories can sometimes feel sort of disjointed and unconnected to us, and yet eventually, I hope that we can see the story of what's been going on. And what we really want is to find out what your story is. What is it that you want? And so hopefully we can chart our way forward when we see how we've done it wrong in the past and how we can avoid that in the future. Please go with us the rest of the day. We thank you for being here today, and we look forward to having you guide us the rest of the day as well. Amen. You are dismissed.